His phone buzzed with 2 messages. "We know where your wife lives. You're already too late." By the time John Navarez reached the building, it was already burning, and his pregnant wife was trapped inside. He carried her through fire knowing one thing for sure. Whoever planned this had just declared war and only one of them would survive. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. 19 years. John Navarez had ruled the city's underworld for nearly 2 decades. He'd survived betrayals, wars, and countless attempts on his life. But on the night someone set fire to his pregnant wife's apartment, all that precision shattered into one desperate truth. He was just a man racing against flames to save the only person who made him human. John Navarez had been a ruler in the shadows for 19 years. At 48 years old, he had orchestrated more operations than most men could count. Territory expansions, strategic eliminations, alliances forged and severed with surgical precision. But power never felt like safety. Every deal still required absolute focus. Every decision still carried the weight of empires. John was a husband now, about to become a father. His wife Lillian was 8 months pregnant. Deliberately kept separate from his world of negotiations and violence, they had built something fragile between chaos and domesticity, a penthouse across the city where she waited, a life insulated by silence and distance. John worked through nights of tense meetings and calculated risk. Lillian stayed in that sanctuary, protected by the one rule he never broke. She would never be touched by his world. They had a rhythm, an understanding built on protection and control. The tattoos visible beneath his tailored suits told stories he never spoke aloud. Dark ink crawled up his neck, disappeared beneath crisp collars, emerged again at his wrists, a map of violence and survival etched into skin weathered by decades of careful brutality. His face carried the sharp, handsome severity of a man who'd learned early that compassion was a luxury and hesitation was death. But lately, John had been thinking about change. The constant vigilance was exhausting. His hands ached, not from violence but from years of clenched fists and suppressed rage. Some mornings, watching Lillian sleep during his rare visits, he wondered what it would be like to simply disappear, to let trusted lieutenants handle operations, while he became something other than feared. His empire had grown powerful through precision and discipline. 6 months earlier, he'd entered a strategic alliance with another gang ruler, a man named Rodrigo Salazar, who controlled the eastern territories. Every operation split 50-50. Every territory negotiated. Every profit divided down the middle. On paper, it was balanced. In reality, John's empire flourished while Salazar's stagnated. John had noticed the shift in recent meetings, Salazar's jaw tightening when profit reports were shared, the way his eyes lingered on John's expanding network of contacts, the seamless efficiency of operations that seemed to multiply wealth effortlessly while Salazar scrambled to maintain what he had. But John had dismissed it as wounded pride. Business. Nothing personal. Tonight was supposed to be different. John was driving back from a final meeting at one of his legitimate holdings, a shipping company that moved more than just cargo. The quarterly reports had been strong. Salazar had seemed satisfied, even cordial. They'd shared expensive whiskey and talked about future ventures. John had allowed himself to relax, just slightly. The city lights blurred past his car windows as he navigated familiar streets. His phone sat in the cup holder, silent. Lillian would be asleep by now, curled around the growing life inside her, safe behind reinforced doors and a security system he'd personally designed. Then the phone lit up. Unknown number. A text message. John's instincts made him slow the car, pull to the side of the empty street. He'd learned long ago that anonymous messages at midnight were never good news. "We know where your wife lives." His blood turned to ice. The words didn't compute at first. His mind raced through security protocols. The apartment's location was known only to 3 people. His most trusted enforcer handled logistics. The building was registered under a shell company, with no connection to his name. Before he could process the implications, a second message arrived. "You're already too late." John's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. His heart, which had remained steady through interrogations and executions and betrayals, began to hammer against his ribs. He looked up through the windshield. Smoke. Thick, black columns rising into the night sky, illuminated by the sickly orange glow of flames. Coming from the direction of Lillian's building, his instincts screamed through the paralysis. He slammed the accelerator, the car lurching forward with a roar. Other vehicles honked as he cut through traffic, ran a red light, took a corner so sharp the tires screamed. His phone rang, guards, lieutenants, voices urgent and panicked. He ignored them all. John could see the flames now, hungry and spreading, devouring the upper floors of the luxury apartment complex where he'd promised Lillian she'd be safe. The building where he'd installed the best security money could buy. The fortress that was supposed to be untouchable. He knew how fast fire consumed everything, how smoke turned breathable air into poison in seconds, how structure gave way to heat and weight and inevitability. He abandoned the car in the middle of the street, door still open, engine still running. People streamed past him in the opposite direction, fleeing, parents carrying children, elderly residents supported by neighbors, smoke-stained faces and terror-wide eyes. The heat hit him like a physical blow as he got closer, a wall of scorching air that made his skin prickle and his eyes water. The main entrance was engulfed. Flames licked through the doorway, fed by oxygen and expensive furnishings. Glass had shattered from windows above, raining down in glittering shards. No way through there. John circled the building, his tailored suit jacket already soaked with sweat, his mind calculating, eliminating options. A service entrance on the east side, he could see it through the smoke. The door still intact but locked. Old steel. Hinges corroded from years of weather and neglect. He looked around desperately for something to use as leverage. A construction dumpster sat abandoned near the loading dock about 15 feet away, likely left by renovations that would never be completed now. John ran to it and pushed with everything he had. The dumpster rolled slowly, grudgingly, metal scraping against asphalt. His expensive shoes found no traction. His hands, accustomed to signing orders and pulling triggers, burned against the hot metal. But he pushed harder, because somewhere in that inferno was Lillian, and whoever had done this was about to learn what happened when you touched John Navarez's world. The dumpster finally budged, rolling forward with agonizing slowness until it crashed against the building's sidewall. John didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the dented metal, his polished shoes slipping on the greasy surface, and reached for the fire escape ladder dangling just above his fingertips. His fingers closed around rusted metal. He pulled himself up, muscles screaming, and began climbing toward the flames that held his entire world captive. But this moment, this desperate ascent through heat and smoke, had been set in motion months earlier, in a room that smelled of cigars and old money. 6 months earlier, the meeting had taken place in neutral territory, a private room at an upscale restaurant where men like John Navarez and Rodrigo Salazar could negotiate without drawing attention. Waiters knew not to enter unless summoned. Security stood discreetly at both exits. Salazar had arrived first, a deliberate power move. He was a decade older than John, his face weathered by violence and paranoia in equal measure. Gray streaked through his dark hair. His suits were expensive but slightly outdated, as if he'd stopped caring about appearances somewhere along the way. When John entered, Salazar stood. They shook hands with the measured grip of men assessing each other's strength. "You're late," Salazar said, though his watch showed John was precisely on time. "Traffic," John replied smoothly, taking his seat. The proposal had been straightforward. Combine operations, pool resources, split everything down the middle 50-50. Salazar controlled the eastern territories with an iron grip, but his methods were old-fashioned, brutal, visible. John's Western Empire ran on efficiency, technology, invisible networks that moved money and product like digital ghosts. Together, they could own the entire city. "I'm tired of competition," Salazar had said, pouring amber liquid into 2 glasses. "We've been circling each other for years, lost good men to pointless territorial disputes. It's time we worked together." John had studied the older man carefully. Salazar's hands shook slightly as he poured age, or something else. His eyes held the desperation of someone watching their kingdom crumble. "Equal partnership," John confirmed. "Every decision approved by both of us. Every profit split exactly in half." "Exactly." Salazar raised his glass. "To new beginnings." They'd toasted, signed papers that meant nothing in court but everything in their world. Shook hands again, this time with witnesses present. John had walked away, believing he'd made a smart strategic move. He hadn't realized he'd just signed a death warrant for his wife. The partnership worked at first. Joint operations ran smoothly. Territory disputes evaporated. Profits increased for both sides. John's lieutenants integrated with Salazar's enforcers. Information flowed freely. Trust, that rarest commodity in their world, seemed to be building, but 3 months in, the cracks began to show. John's operations flourished. His side of the partnership generated revenue that seemed to multiply effortlessly legitimate businesses, laundering money through layers of shell companies, digital networks moving product without physical risk, connections with corrupt officials that opened doors Salazar couldn't even find. Salazar's operations, by contrast, stagnated. The old methods that had sustained his empire for decades suddenly seemed antiquated. His enforcers got arrested. His suppliers got nervous. His territory remained static while John's expanded like water, finding every crack in the foundation. The 50-50 split became increasingly lopsided in perception, if not in reality. Salazar was contributing half the risk for less than half the innovation. John noticed the change during their monthly review meetings. Salazar's jaw would tighten when profit reports were shared. His questions became sharper, more suspicious. He started requesting detailed breakdowns of every operation, as if searching for evidence of deception. "Your numbers are impressive," Salazar said one evening, staring at spreadsheets that told the story of John's success. "Almost too impressive. We're using modern systems," John replied calmly. "Digital infrastructure, encrypted communications, automated. I know what you're using." Salazar's interruption was sharp. "I'm asking if you're using it to cheat me." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. John had kept his voice level, professional. "Everything is split exactly as agreed. You have full access to the books. Books can be doctored. Then audit them." John met his eyes steadily. "Bring in your own accountants. Check every transaction. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find." Salazar had backed down, but the seed was planted. Paranoia grew like cancer in the older man's mind. He convinced himself that John's success was theft, that the alliance was a sophisticated con, that he was being played by a younger, smarter operator who'd learned to steal without leaving fingerprints. It wasn't true. John had honored every term of their agreement, but truth mattered less than perception in their world, and Salazar perceived himself as a fool being slowly bled dry. The older man began to spiral. He drank more, slept less. His own lieutenants grew concerned as he demanded impossible results, accused loyal men of betrayal, saw conspiracies in every shadow. And in his paranoid desperation, Salazar made a decision. He needed leverage, something to hurt John the way he felt hurt, something to balance the scales he believed had been tipped against him. He began to investigate, carefully, quietly, using resources John didn't know he had. It took Salazar 2 months to find what he was looking for. John Navarez, the untouchable ghost who ran an empire from the shadows, had a weakness. A pregnant wife named Lillian, hidden away in a luxury apartment under a false name, protected by security systems that were impressive but not impenetrable. Salazar had stared at the surveillance photos for hours. Lillian leaving for doctor's appointments. Lillian shopping for baby clothes. Lillian laughing with a friend at a cafe, her hand resting on her swollen belly. John's entire carefully constructed world, vulnerable in flesh and blood. The plan formed slowly, methodically. Salazar didn't want to kill Lillian outright. That would be too obvious, too direct. He wanted John to feel what he felt. Helpless, outmaneuvered, beaten by forces he couldn't control. He wanted John to know what it felt like to lose everything. So Salazar made arrangements, found men willing to do what was necessary, paid them well for their silence and their cruelty. And on a quiet Thursday night, while John sat in a meeting discussing quarterly projections, Rodrigo Salazar sent a team to set fire to an apartment building. Not to kill, to break. John's lungs burned as he climbed higher up the fire escape, the metal scorching his palms even through the fabric of his suit jacket. Below him, sirens wailed. Above him, flames consumed the building floor by floor, turning his carefully constructed sanctuary into an inferno. He didn't know yet about Salazar's paranoia, didn't know about the months of surveillance, didn't know that every step he took toward saving Lillian was a step into a trap designed specifically for him. All he knew was that someone had found his weakness, and they'd tried to burn it away. 3 weeks earlier, the man's name was Gabriel Torres, and he'd been one of John's enforcers for 7 years. Not the most senior, not the most brutal, but reliable, efficient, and crucially overlooked. Gabriel was the kind of man who handled logistics while others handled violence. He arranged transportation, managed safe houses, coordinated schedules. He was the infrastructure that kept John's empire running smoothly, invisible and essential in equal measure. He was also drowning in gambling debt. Salazar's investigator had discovered this weakness the way sharks smell blood in water. $50,000 owed to underground casinos, another $30,000 to loan sharks who were losing patience. Gabriel's daughter needed surgery his insurance wouldn't cover. His wife didn't know about any of it. The investigator had approached Gabriel at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment. Casual, unthreatening. Just 2 men having a conversation that would change everything. "I can make your problems disappear," the investigator had said, sliding an envelope across the table. "All of them. The debt, the surgery, everything." Gabriel had stared at the envelope without touching it, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He knew what this was, knew what it meant. "What do you want?" "Information." The investigator's smile was predatory. "About John Navarez." Gabriel had felt his stomach drop. "I don't know anything worth that much money." "You know more than you think." The investigator leaned forward. "Personal details, routines, weaknesses, things a man like Navarez would want kept secret." Gabriel had looked around the coffee shop at ordinary people living ordinary lives, unburdened by the weight of loyalty and survival that crushed men like him. His daughter's face flashed in his mind. 8 years old, laughing, alive. He'd reached for the envelope. The information came slowly at first. Gabriel fed Salazar's investigator scraps John's preferred routes through the city, which restaurants he frequented, what time he typically left the office. Nothing critical. Nothing that could directly harm his boss. But the money kept coming. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. Each payment dulling Gabriel's conscience a little more. Each betrayal becoming easier than the last. "We need more," the investigator had said during their 4th meeting. "Something personal, something that matters." Gabriel had hesitated, standing on the edge of a cliff he couldn't uncross. "I don't have access to that kind of—" "He has a wife." The investigator's interruption was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "We know she exists. We just don't know where." Gabriel's blood had run cold. John's protection of Lillian was absolute. Her existence was the most closely guarded secret in the organization. Only 3 people knew where she lived, and Gabriel wasn't one of them. "I can't help you with that," Gabriel had said, standing to leave. The investigator caught his wrist. "Your daughter's surgery is scheduled for next month. $70,000. Do you have $70,000, Gabriel?" The question hung in the air like a noose. Gabriel had sat back down. It took him 2 weeks to find what Salazar wanted. Gabriel didn't have direct access to Lillian's location, but he had access to John's scheduling system. And buried in the encrypted calendar, appearing once every 2 weeks like clockwork, was a blocked-out period marked only with coordinates. No description, no contact name. Just numbers that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Gabriel had stared at those coordinates for 3 days before copying them down. His hands shook as he wrote. His daughter's face kept appearing in his mind, smiling, healthy, alive because he'd made a choice. He'd told himself it was just information, just numbers. He wasn't pulling the trigger, wasn't setting the fire, wasn't the one who would do whatever came next. He was just a man trying to save his daughter. The investigator had seemed pleased when Gabriel handed over the coordinates. "Smart man," he'd said, sliding another envelope across the table. "Your debt is cleared. Your daughter's surgery is paid for. And we never had this conversation." Gabriel had taken the money and walked away, carrying the weight of betrayal like stones in his pockets. He'd told himself he could live with it. He'd told himself John would never know. He'd told himself that whatever happened next wasn't his responsibility. The present. Salazar had studied the coordinates for hours after receiving them, cross-referenced with property records, confirmed with surveillance. The apartment building was upscale, secure, registered under a shell company with no obvious connection to John Navarez. Perfect. He'd assembled a small team, professionals who asked no questions and left no traces. 2 men to set the fire, 1 to send the warning messages, another to monitor John's response. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Salazar didn't want Lillian dead at least, not immediately. He wanted John to feel helpless, wanted him to arrive just in time to watch his world burn, wanted him to understand that all his power, all his careful planning, all his strategic brilliance meant nothing against a man willing to target what he loved most. The fire would be the opening move, a declaration that the 50-50 partnership was over. A message written in smoke and ash that said, "You may be smarter, younger, more successful, but I can still destroy you." Salazar had given the order on a Thursday evening, sipping whiskey in his office while his men moved into position. He'd felt no guilt, no hesitation, only the grim satisfaction of a man who'd finally found a way to hurt someone who seemed invulnerable. He'd sent the first text himself, fingers steady on the burner phone. "We know where your wife lives." Watched the clock, counted seconds. Imagine John's face when he read those words. Then sent the second message. You're already too late. Across the city, flames were already crawling up expensive curtains, eating through imported hardwood, turning a sanctuary into a death trap. And John Navarez was climbing through smoke and heat, racing toward a moment that would redefine everything he'd built, racing toward the exact scenario Rodrigo Salazar had designed 2 hours earlier. Lillian Navarez stood in the nursery, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a paint swatch against the wall. Soft sage, green, or warm ivory, she'd been debating the choice for 3 days now, as if the color of these walls would somehow determine the kind of life their child would have. Safe, peaceful, far from the shadows that defined John's world. She was 32 years old, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes that carried a quiet strength John had recognized the moment they met. She wore simple clothes, a white cotton shirt stretched over her 8-month belly, comfortable pants, no jewelry except the wedding band she never removed. The apartment was beautiful in its simplicity, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture in neutral tones, a kitchen she actually used, unlike the showpiece kitchens in John's other properties. This place was hers, a life separate from his empire, built on the agreement that she would never ask questions about his work, and he would never bring that work to her door. It had been a fair arrangement, a necessary one. Lillian set down the paint swatch and moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. John was in a meeting tonight, something about quarterly reports. He'd said vaguely during their brief phone call that afternoon. He'd sounded tired, distracted. She worried about him more now that she was carrying his child. Worried about the stress that lined his face, the tension that never quite left his shoulders, the darkness in his eyes that sometimes made him seem 1,000 miles away even when he was lying beside her. But she'd made her peace with loving a man whose world she couldn't fully enter. She had this sanctuary, this life growing inside her, this fragile bubble of normalcy they'd carved out of chaos. She turned away from the window and headed toward the bedroom, thinking about calling John one more time before sleep, just to hear his voice. She never made it to the phone. The smell hit her first acrid, chemical, wrong, smoke, but not from cooking or candles. Something harsher, more urgent. Lillian moved into the hallway and froze. Gray smoke was curling under the apartment door, seeping through the edges like ghostly fingers reaching for her. Her heart lurched. Fire alarm protocols flashed through her mind. Touch the door. Check for heat. Stay low. Get out. She pressed her palm against the door and yanked it back immediately. Scorching hot. The hallway outside was already engulfed. Panic surged through her chest, but she forced herself to think. The apartment had 2 exits, the main door now blocked by fire, and the balcony. She was on the 8th floor. Too high to jump, but maybe the fire escape. She ran to the living room, threw open the balcony door, and stepped outside. The night air hit her face, cool and clean after the smoke-tainted atmosphere inside. She looked left and right desperately. No fire escape. The architect had deemed them unnecessary in a modern building with state-of-the-art sprinkler systems. Systems that apparently weren't working. Smoke began pouring through the open balcony door behind her. Lillian's breath came in short gasps. The baby kicked inside her, frantic, as if sensing her terror. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed John. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. "Please," she whispered. "Please pick up. The present." John's phone was ringing as he climbed the fire escape, but he couldn't hear it over the roar of flames and the screaming of his own thoughts. His suit jacket smoldered where embers had landed. His hands were raw and bleeding. His lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, but he kept climbing. 4th floor, 5th, 6th. The metal beneath his feet grew hotter with each level. Windows exploded outward as fire consumed oxygen and furnishings. He could see people trapped on balconies, waving frantically, screaming for help that wouldn't arrive in time. 7th floor. His muscles screamed, his vision blurred from smoke and heat. But he could see Lillian's balcony now, 8th floor, corner unit, exactly where it should be, and he could see her. Even through the smoke and chaos, he could see her white shirt, her dark hair, her hand resting protectively over her belly as she leaned over the balcony railing, looking down at the impossible distance to the ground. "Lillian." His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the inferno, but somehow she heard it. Her head snapped toward him. Their eyes met across flames and smoke and the space between life and death. Relief flooded her face for just a moment, then terror as she saw where he was, what he was doing, the flames licking at the fire escape beneath his feet. "John, no, it's not safe." He didn't answer. Couldn't waste breath on words. He pulled himself up the last section of ladder, his arms shaking with exhaustion, and swung onto the 8th floor platform. The metal groaned beneath his weight. The bolts anchoring the fire escape to the building had loosened from heat and age. He could feel the structure shifting, pulling away from the wall. They had seconds, maybe less. John crossed the narrow platform in 3 strides and reached for Lillian. She grasped his outstretched hands, and he pulled her from the balcony onto the fire escape with him. The moment her weight transferred to the platform, he heard the sound that would haunt his nightmares, a deep, metallic groan as stressed bolts began to fail. Lillian heard it too. Her eyes went wide. John. The fire escape lurched, dropped 6 inches. The bolts at the top were tearing free from the brick, unable to hold the combined weight and heat stress. John didn't think. He grabbed Lillian and pushed her toward the ladder going down, his body between her and the flames still consuming the building. Move. Now. She moved, climbing down as fast as her pregnant body would allow. John followed, one hand on her back, guiding and steadying her even as the fire escape continued its slow, inevitable separation from the building. Above them, the 8th floor platform tore completely free and crashed down in a shriek of twisting metal. They were between the 7th and 6th floors when John heard his phone buzzing in his pocket, a text message, perfectly timed in its cruelty. He didn't need to look to know who it was from. But later, when he finally checked, he would see the message that confirmed everything. Now you know how it feels to lose. The fire escape shuddered again, bolts shrieking as they tore from the brick. John felt the entire structure tilt backward, pulling away from the building at an angle that defied physics and promised death. "Don't stop!" he shouted to Lillian, his hand pressed firmly against her back, guiding her down even as his own feet struggled to find purchase on the slanted metal grating. Lillian's breathing came in ragged gasps, panic, exertion, and the baby pressing against her lungs, all combining into a suffocating cocktail. Her hands gripped the ladder rails so tightly her knuckles had gone white. 5th floor. The heat was unbearable now. Flames had spread to multiple floors, turning the building into a vertical furnace. John could feel his skin blistering where embers landed on his neck and wrists. The tattoos that marked his chest and arms felt like they were burning into his flesh all over again. 4th floor. Above them, another section of fire escape tore free with a sound like a gunshot. Metal crashed against metal, sending vibrations through the entire structure. The ladder beneath Lillian's feet swayed violently. She screamed. John caught her before she could fall, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other gripping the ladder with strength born of pure desperation. For a moment they hung there, suspended between floors, between life and death, between the world John had built and the world that was trying to take everything from him. "I've got you," he said into her ear, his voice rough from smoke. "I've got you both." Lillian nodded against his chest, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. Then she found her footing again and continued climbing down. 3rd floor. John could see firefighters below now, shouting instructions he couldn't hear over the roar of flames. They were positioning a ladder truck, extending the aerial platform, but it was moving too slowly. The building was coming apart faster than rescue could arrive. 2nd floor. The fire escape groaned one final time, a deep, agonizing sound of metal accepting its fate. John felt it beginning to collapse, the entire structure peeling away from the building like skin from burned flesh. He didn't hesitate. With Lillian just steps above the 2nd floor landing, John grabbed her around the waist and jumped. They fell together. 15 feet. 20. Time stretched and compressed simultaneously. John twisted in the air, positioning his body beneath hers, knowing the impact would shatter something but accepting it as the price. They crashed through the canvas awning of the building's side entrance. The fabric tore but slowed their fall just enough. They hit the concrete loading dock in a tangle of limbs and torn fabric. John's back struck first, absorbing the impact with his shoulders and spine. Lightning bolts of pain shot through his entire body. Lillian landed on top of him, gasping, crying, but alive. Behind them, the fire escape finally surrendered completely. 8 stories of metal twisted and fell, crashing into the space they'd occupied seconds before with enough force to crack the concrete. For a moment, neither of them moved. John's vision swam with dark spots. His ribs screamed with each breath. But he could feel Lillian's heart beating against his chest, rapid and strong, could feel the baby moving between them, protected by her body and his, still alive. All 3 of them. Hands grabbed them, firefighters, paramedics, strangers pulling them away from the building as flames continued to consume it. Someone was shouting about medical attention. Someone else was trying to separate John from Lillian. He wouldn't let go. "Sir, we need to check her. Don't touch her." John's voice was raw but absolute. He pulled Lillian closer, his burned hands leaving marks on her white shirt. His body still curved protectively around hers even as they lay on the concrete. A paramedic knelt beside them, a young woman with kind eyes who understood something in John's expression that went beyond words. "I'm just going to check her vitals," she said gently. "You can hold her hand the whole time. I promise." John finally loosened his grip enough for the paramedic to work. Lillian's hand found his, their fingers interlocking with desperate strength. Blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, gentle hands checking for injuries. "The baby?" Lillian's voice cracked on the words. The paramedic pressed the stethoscope against Lillian's belly, moving it slowly, listening with professional concentration that felt like it lasted centuries. Then she smiled. "Strong heartbeat. Your baby's a fighter." Lillian collapsed back against John's chest, sobbing with relief. He wrapped his arms around her again, his face buried in her smoke-stained hair, and for the first time in 19 years, John Navarez felt tears burning tracks down his own face, not from the smoke, not from the pain, from the realization of how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered. Around them, the building continued to burn. Fire trucks sprayed water into the inferno. News cameras captured the chaos. Survivors wrapped in emergency blankets gave statements to police, but John saw none of it. He saw only Lillian's face, the rise and fall of her chest, the hand resting on her belly where their child impossibly miraculously still lived, and he saw the message on his phone, still glowing on the cracked screen that had somehow survived the fall. "Now you know how it feels to lose." Except John hadn't lost. Someone had tried to take everything from him, had set a fire meant to break him psychologically before destroying him completely. But Lillian was alive. The baby was alive. And now John understood with crystalline clarity what had happened. This wasn't random, wasn't an accident, wasn't even a warning. This was a declaration of war disguised as tragedy. Someone who knew about Lillian, someone with access to her location, someone who wanted John to feel helpless, powerless, beaten. The partnership. The only people outside his innermost circle who could have connected the dots, who had reason to resent him, who had the resources to orchestrate something this precise. Salazar. John's grief hardened into something colder, sharper. His hands burned, blistered, still trembling slightly from exertion, curled into fists against Lillian's back. The paramedic was saying something about taking them to the hospital, about treating his injuries, about monitoring the baby. John nodded without really hearing, because in his mind, he was no longer on a concrete loading dock holding his pregnant wife. He was standing in front of Rodrigo Salazar, watching the older man's face as he realized his plan had failed, watching him understand that he hadn't broken John Navarez. He'd created something far more dangerous. A man with absolutely nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. John sat in a plastic chair outside Lillian's room, his burned hands wrapped in white gauze that was already seeping through with blood and clear fluid. His suit, custom-tailored, worth more than most people made in a month, was ruined, torn, and scorched beyond recognition. Soot stained his face and neck. His hair, normally perfectly styled, stood in chaotic directions. He looked like what he was, a man who'd walked through hell and carried someone out with him. The doctors had insisted on separating them. Lillian needed a full examination, monitoring for the baby, treatment for smoke inhalation. John had refused at first, his arms locked around her like she might disappear if he let go. It had taken Lillian herself, her voice hoarse but steady, to convince him. "I'm okay," she'd whispered, touching his face with trembling fingers. "We're okay. Let them help us." So he'd released her, watched as nurses wheeled her away, and now he sat alone in a hallway that felt too bright and too quiet after the chaos of flames and sirens. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Messages from lieutenants, guards, associates, all wanting to know what happened, if he needed anything, if orders were forthcoming. He ignored them all, except one. John pulled out his phone with gauze-wrapped hands, the bandages making his movements clumsy. The screen was cracked but still functional. He scrolled past dozens of unread messages until he found the one he was looking for. "Now you know how it feels to lose." Unknown number. Sent at precisely 11:52 p.m., while he was climbing the fire escape, while Lillian was trapped on the balcony, while their entire world was burning. John stared at those words until they blurred. He'd been in this business long enough to recognize a signature when he saw one. The timing too precise to be random. the message too specific to be generic. This wasn't some anonymous threat from a rival he'd wronged. This was personal. This was someone who knew about Lillian, who knew she was his weakness, who wanted him to watch her burn before they came for him. The 50-50 partnership had been crumbling for months, Salazar's resentment growing like cancer during every meeting. His accusations of cheating, his paranoid demands for audits, his barely concealed rage at watching John's empire flourish while his own collapsed. John had dismissed it as wounded pride. He'd been wrong. Footsteps approached down the hallway, heavy boots, multiple people moving with purpose. John's hand instinctively moved toward his waistband before he remembered he wasn't carrying, had left everything behind when he ran toward the fire. 3 men rounded the corner. Not police, not hospital security. His men, the lead enforcer, a man named Raphael, stopped a respectful distance away. He was mid-30s, built like a boxer, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Loyal, efficient, one of the few John trusted with his life. Boss. Raphael's voice was quiet, aware they were in a public space. We got here as soon as we heard. John said nothing, just stared at them with eyes that had seen too much in the past 3 hours. Raphael shifted uncomfortably. The building's still burning. Fire investigators are already asking questions. We can handle it. Make sure nothing traces back. Someone set that fire. The words came out flat, emotionless, a statement of fact rather than accusation. Raphael exchanged glances with the other 2 men. We figured. Question is who? I know who. John's voice was still quiet, but something in it made all 3 enforcers go still. I need you to find Gabriel Torres. Bring him to me, alive. Torres? Raphael's confusion was genuine. He's logistics. Been with us for years. You think someone gave them Lillian's location. John's hands clenched inside their gauze wrappings, pain flaring through burned nerve endings. Only 3 people knew where she lived. Me, you, and Torres handled the security installation. Raphael's face darkened with understanding. If he talked, find him. John stood, his body protesting every movement. Burns, bruises, possibly cracked ribs. He'd refused medical attention until he knew Lillian was safe. Don't hurt him. Don't threaten him. Just bring him somewhere quiet where we can talk. And if he runs, he won't. John's smile was cold. He thinks he got away with it. He thinks the fire covered his tracks. Raphael nodded and turned to leave, the other 2 men following. But John's voice stopped them. Raphael, the enforcer turned back. After Torres. John paused, his jaw working. I need you to reach out to our contact in Salazar's organization, the one on our payroll. I need to know where Salazar is right now, what he's doing, who he's with. Understanding flickered in Raphael's eyes. You're sure it was him? The message came from someone who wanted me to feel helpless. John's voice was soft, almost gentle. Someone who thought taking my wife would break me before destroying me. Someone who believed they were teaching me a lesson. He pulled out his phone, showed Raphael the message. Now you know how it feels to lose. That's not strategy, John said. That's emotion. That's a man who feels cheated and wants me to suffer the way he thinks he's suffered. Raphael read the message twice, his face hardening. When do you want the meeting set up? Not yet. John pocketed the phone. First we find Torres, confirm everything, then we move. The enforcers left without another word, their boots echoing down the sterile hallway. John returned to his plastic chair and lowered himself carefully, his body screaming in protest. His hands throbbed, his lungs ached. Every breath tasted like smoke, but his mind was clear. For 19 years, he'd built an empire on calculation and control. He'd made strategic decisions, weighed costs and benefits, chosen paths that maximized power while minimizing risk. Tonight changed everything. Tonight someone had crossed the one line John had drawn in blood and fire. A door opened down the hall. A doctor emerged, clipboard in hand, scanning the waiting area. Her eyes found John. Mr. Navarez. He stood, his heart suddenly hammering despite his outward calm. The doctor's face softened into a tired smile. Your wife and baby are stable. Vitals are strong. No signs of complications. She's asking for you. The relief hit John like a physical blow. His knees almost buckled. He steadied himself against the chair. Can I see her? Room 847. But Mr. Navarez. The doctor's expression turned professional again. You need treatment too. Those burns are serious. And I suspect you have at least 2 cracked ribs. After, John said, already moving past her toward room 847. Sir, infection is a real concern. After. He walked down the hallway, each step deliberate despite the pain. Outside room, 847. He paused, one burned hand on the door handle, then he pushed it open. Lillian lay in the hospital bed, oxygen cannula in her nose, IV in her arm, monitors beeping softly beside her. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. Her face was clean now, the soot washed away, revealing the woman he'd married, the woman he'd almost lost. Her eyes opened when he entered. Tears immediately started flowing. John crossed the room and sat carefully on the edge of her bed. He took her hand in both of his, mindful of the IV, of the fragility that had always been there but he'd chosen to ignore. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I promised you'd be safe. I promised my world would never touch you. I'm so—" "John," Lillian squeezed his hand, stopping the words. "You saved us. You ran into a burning building and carried us out. That's what happened tonight. Someone tried to kill you because of me, but they didn't." Her other hand moved to her belly, to the life still growing there despite everything. "We're still here, all three of us." John looked at their joined hands, his wrapped in gauze, hers pale and delicate against the white sheets. The contrast between his world and hers had never been more stark. "I have to tell you something," he said quietly. "About tonight, about why it happened." Lillian's face went still, but she nodded. "Okay." So John told her everything, about the partnership with Salazar, about the growing resentment, about the message that had sent him racing across the city, about his certainty that this wasn't random violence but calculated revenge. He told her about the empire he'd built, the decisions he'd made, the blood on his hands that had funded the sanctuary where she lived. He told her things he'd never said aloud, breaking the agreement they'd made years ago that she wouldn't ask and he wouldn't tell. When he finished, the room was silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Lillian stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice steady despite the tears still streaming down her face. "What happens now?" John looked at her, at this woman who'd somehow loved him despite everything he was, who was carrying his child, who'd almost died because someone wanted to hurt him, and he made a vow. Not the kind spoken in churches or written in contracts, the kind forged in fire and smoke and the absolute clarity that comes from nearly losing everything. "I'm going to make sure this never happens again," he said softly. "Whatever it takes, whoever I have to remove, whatever I have to become." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, breathing in the hospital smell mixed with her scent. "Whoever did this will pay," John whispered. "Not because of pride, not because of business, because they tried to take you from me. Both of you." Lillian's hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the soot stains the nurses had missed. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me you'll come back, that whatever you do, whatever happens, you'll come back to us." John pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. In them he saw fear, yes, but also understanding, acceptance, love that somehow persisted despite everything she now knew. "I promise," he said. And John Navarez, who'd broken countless promises in his 19 years of building an empire, meant this one with every burned nerve ending, every aching rib, every beat of his heart. He would come back. But first, he would make sure that everyone who'd participated in tonight's fire understood exactly what happened when you threatened John Navarez's family, starting with Gabriel Torres, then ending with Rodrigo Salazar. Outside room 847, in the too-bright hallway, Rafael's phone buzzed with confirmation. Torres located, awaiting instructions. The hunt had begun. John stayed with Lillian until she fell asleep, her hand still clutching his despite the IV line and the exhaustion that finally claimed her. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, the steady green line on the heart monitor, the slight movement beneath her hospital gown where their child rested. Still alive. Still safe. For now, when he was certain she was deep in sleep, John carefully extracted his hand and stood. Every muscle screamed in protest. His ribs felt like broken glass grinding together. But pain was irrelevant now. He had work to do. A nurse tried to intercept him as he left the room. "Mr. Navarez, you really need to let us treat those burns. Later." He walked past her without breaking stride, pulling out his phone with gauze-wrapped hands. One message to Rafael. "Where?" The response came within seconds. "Old warehouse. Brooklyn." He came willingly. John's jaw tightened. Willingly meant Gabriel didn't know yet. Didn't understand that his betrayal had been discovered, that the anonymous money he'd accepted had been bought with blood. Didn't know that John Navarez was coming. The warehouse stood in an industrial area that had been dying for decades. Rusted fencing surrounded crumbling brick buildings. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting more shadow than illumination, the perfect place for conversations that needed to remain private. John's car, a replacement vehicle Raphael had arranged, pulled up to the side entrance at 3:47 a.m. He sat in the darkness for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his mind cold and focused despite the pain radiating through his body. Gabriel Torres had been with him for 7 years, reliable, efficient, invisible in the way good logistics men needed to be. John had trusted him with schedules, safe houses, coordination, had never suspected that trust could be bought for the price of medical bills and gambling debts. John exited the car and entered the warehouse through a side door that Raphael had left unlocked. Inside, the space was vast and empty concrete floors, exposed beams, windows so dirty they were opaque. A single light hung from a chain in the center, illuminating a small circle. Raphael stood at the edge of that circle, arms crossed. 2 other enforcers flanked him, and in the center, sitting in a folding chair beneath the light, was Gabriel Torres. He looked small under the harsh illumination, mid-30s, average height, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, casual clothes suggesting he'd been pulled from home. His hands rested on his knees, not bound. His face showed confusion but not yet fear. "Boss." Gabriel stood when he saw John, relief flooding his features. "Thank God. Raphael said you needed to see me urgently. I heard about the fire. Is Mrs. Navarez okay? Is the baby—" "Sit down, Gabriel." Something in John's voice made the words stick in Gabriel's throat. He sat slowly, his confusion deepening. John walked into the circle of light, his footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. He stopped directly in front of Gabriel, close enough that the other man had to crane his neck to look up at him. "Mrs. Navarez is alive," John said quietly. "So is our child, despite someone's best efforts to burn them to death tonight." Gabriel's face went pale. That's horrible. Do you know who?" "Someone who knew where she lived." John's voice remained soft, conversational. "That apartment was registered under a shell company, no connection to my name. Only 3 people knew the location." He watched Gabriel's face carefully, saw the moment comprehension dawned, saw fear replace confusion in his eyes. "Boss, I would never—" "You handled the security installation 6 months ago," John continued, as if Gabriel hadn't spoken. "You had access to the address, the floor plan, the system specifications. I swear on my daughter's life." "Don't." The single word cracked like a whip. "Don't bring your daughter into this room." Silence fell. Gabriel's breathing had gone rapid and shallow. John lowered himself carefully into a second folding chair that Raphael had positioned facing Gabriel's. The movement sent agony through his ribs, but he kept his face neutral. "I'm going to tell you what I know," John said, "and then you're going to tell me what I don't know. Understand?" Gabriel nodded, his hands trembling on his knees. "You're in debt, gambling mostly, maybe some loan sharks. Your daughter needs surgery, something expensive your insurance won't cover." John paused. "Someone approached you, offered to solve all your problems in exchange for information." The color drained completely from Gabriel's face. "You told yourself it was just information," John continued, his voice still quiet, still eerily calm. "Just numbers. You weren't pulling triggers, weren't setting fires. You were just a man trying to save his daughter." A tear rolled down Gabriel's cheek. "But here's what you didn't consider." John leaned forward despite the pain. "That information became accelerant. Became the match that lit the fire. Became the reason my pregnant wife almost died tonight." "I didn't know." The words burst out of Gabriel like a dam breaking. "I swear to God I didn't know what they were planning. They just wanted her location. They said it was for leverage, for negotiating." "Who is they?" Gabriel's mouth opened and closed. Fear warred with self-preservation in his eyes. John waited. Patient, inevitable. "I need protection," Gabriel finally whispered. "If I tell you, if Salazar finds out—" "Salazar." John had known, but hearing the name spoken aloud crystallized everything. The partnership dissolved in a single word. "Gabriel." John's voice dropped even lower. "Look at my hands." Gabriel's eyes moved to the gauze wrappings, to the blood and fluid seeping through white fabric. "These burns happened because I climbed through fire to reach my wife," John said. "I carried her down a collapsing fire escape while my skin melted. Do you understand what that means?" Gabriel was crying openly now. "It means I will do anything, endure any pain, cross any line to protect my family." John stood, towering over the broken man in the chair. So when you tell me you need protection, understand that you're talking to the only person who can provide it. But protection is earned. What do you want to know? Everything. John gestured to Raphael, who produced a small digital recorder and set it on a third folding chair between them. The investigator who approached you. How they found you. What you told them. Every meeting. Every payment. Every detail. Gabriel stared at the recorder like it was a loaded gun. And if I tell you everything, then your daughter gets her surgery, John said. Your debts disappear. You and your family relocate somewhere safe, with enough money to start over. Hope flickered in Gabriel's eyes. Really, I don't punish children for their father's mistakes. John sat back down, every movement carefully controlled despite the pain. But if you lie to me, if you leave anything out, if I discover you're still in contact with Salazar's people, he left the threat unfinished. More effective that way. Gabriel swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay, I'll tell you everything. Raphael pressed record. His name was Mateo Cruz, Gabriel began, his voice shaking. He approached me at a coffee shop 3 weeks ago. The recording lasted 47 minutes. Gabriel talked about the investigator named Cruz, about the initial approach, the careful vetting, the escalating payments, about the moment he'd realized they wanted information about John's family and had almost walked away. Almost. He described finding the coordinates in John's encrypted calendar, the guilt that had consumed him afterward, the relief when the money cleared and his daughter's surgery was scheduled. He talked about the burner phone Cruz had given him for contact, about the final message he'd received 2 days ago. Transaction complete. Destroy this phone. Gabriel had destroyed it, thrown the pieces in 3 different dumpsters across Brooklyn, but he remembered the number. When he finished, silence filled the warehouse. Gabriel sat slumped in his chair, drained. Raphael stood motionless at the edge of the light. The other enforcers waited for orders. John stood slowly, his body screaming, his mind crystal clear. Raphael, arrange the relocation. Mexico City. New identities. Medical care for his daughter. He looked at Gabriel. You leave tonight. You never contact anyone from your old life. You never speak my name again. Are we clear? Gabriel nodded, tears of relief mixing with shame on his face. Thank you. Don't thank me. John's voice was ice. Thank the fact that I keep my word. Now get him out of here. 2 enforcers escorted Gabriel out. His footsteps echoed away into darkness. Raphael remained, waiting. The phone number Gabriel gave us, John said. Can you trace it? Already did while he was talking. Raphael pulled out his own phone, showing John a screen full of data. Burner, like he said, but it pinged off towers in Salazar's territory, cross-referenced with surveillance footage from the times Gabriel mentioned meeting Cruz. He swiped to a grainy image, a man in his 40s, dark hair, nondescript features, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. Mateo Cruz, real name unknown, but he's been spotted 3 times in the past month entering Salazar's headquarters. John studied the image, memorizing every detail. Is Salazar still at headquarters? According to our contact inside his organization, yes. He's been there all night. Raphael's expression darkened. Our contact also says Salazar's been drinking, celebrating something. Celebrating, while Lillian lay in a hospital bed, while John's hands were wrapped in gauze from burned flesh, while their unborn child's heartbeat was the only thing that had kept John from losing his mind entirely. Salazar was celebrating. Set up a meeting, John said quietly. Tomorrow night. Tell him I want to discuss dissolving the partnership. Make it sound amicable. Business decision. Nothing personal. Raphael's eyes widened slightly. You're going to meet with him? He thinks he broke me. John walked toward the warehouse exit, each step measured despite the pain. He thinks the fire was the beginning of my destruction. He's waiting for me to collapse, to make mistakes, to show weakness. He paused at the door, looking back at Raphael. Instead, I'm going to walk into his headquarters and end this face-to-face. Boss, that's his territory. His guards. I know. John's smile was cold and certain. That's why he'll never see it coming. He left the warehouse as dawn began to break over Brooklyn, painting the industrial wasteland in shades of red and gold. The hunt was nearly over. Tomorrow night, Rodrigo Salazar would learn what happened when you tried to burn John Navarez's world. Tomorrow night, the 50-50 partnership would end permanently. Tomorrow night, John would make good on his vow. Whoever did this will pay. The meeting was set for 9 p.m. at Salazar's headquarters, a renovated factory building in the eastern district that served as both office and fortress. John arrived alone, driving himself despite Raphael's protests, despite the doctor's orders to rest, despite the pain that made every breath feel like knives. He wore a fresh suit, charcoal gray with a black shirt, no tie. The bandages on his hands had been replaced with smaller, more discreet dressings that barely showed beneath his cuffs. To anyone looking, he appeared composed, professional, unbothered. Only the slight tightness around his eyes betrayed the agony each movement cost him. Salazar's guards searched him at the entrance, patted down his jacket, his legs, even checked his shoes. They found nothing because he'd brought nothing. No weapons, no wire, no backup plan, just himself and the cold certainty of what needed to happen. The guard led him through corridors that still smelled of factory oil beneath fresh paint, past offices where Salazar's lieutenants worked, past counting rooms where money changed hands, up 2 flights of stairs to the top floor, where Salazar kept his private office. The door opened to reveal a space trying too hard to project power. Expensive desk, leather chairs, artwork that cost more than it was worth, windows overlooking the eastern territories like a king surveying his domain, and behind the desk, Rodrigo Salazar. He stood when John entered, a smile on his weathered face that didn't reach his eyes. He wore an expensive suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight recently. Stress, perhaps, or the corrosive effects of jealousy eating him from the inside. "John." Salazar spread his hands in welcome. "I was sorry to hear about the fire. Terrible tragedy. How is your wife?" John crossed the office slowly, his footsteps deliberate on the hardwood floor. He didn't sit in the offered chair. Instead, he stopped 3 feet from Salazar's desk, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "She's alive," John said quietly. "So is my child." Despite someone's best efforts, something flickered in Salazar's eyes, surprise quickly masked. "I'm glad to hear it. These things, random violence, it's a plague on our city. Sit down, Rodrigo." The command, delivered softly, stopped Salazar mid-sentence. He sat slowly, his false smile fading. John remained standing. "I'm going to tell you a story," John said, his voice conversational, "about a man who entered a partnership believing it would make him stronger, who agreed to split everything 50-50 because he thought shared power was better than constant warfare." Salazar's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. This man honored his agreement completely. John continued. "Split every profit exactly as promised. Gave his partner full access to books, operations, decision-making, did everything right." He paused, letting silence fill the space. But his partner became convinced he was being cheated, not because of evidence there was none, but because success breeds resentment in small minds, because some men measure themselves by others' failures rather than their own achievements. Salazar's hands clenched on his desk. "Careful, John." "So this jealous partner," John continued, ignoring the warning, "decided to teach the successful man a lesson, to make him understand what loss felt like, to break him psychologically before destroying him completely." John pulled out his phone with bandaged hands, the movement slow and deliberate. He found the message and held the screen toward Salazar. "Now you know how it feels to lose." "The partner hired an investigator named Mateo Cruz," John said softly. "Cruz bribed one of the successful man's enforcers, a man named Gabriel Torres who had gambling debts and a sick daughter. Torres provided the location of the successful man's pregnant wife. The blood was draining from Salazar's face now. Then the partner set a fire." John's voice dropped even lower, barely above a whisper. Sent messages timed perfectly to maximize fear. Wanted the successful man to arrive just in time to watch his wife burn, to feel helpless, powerless, broken. He pocketed the phone. "But the wife survived," John said. "And the successful man stopped being measured and calculating. He became something much more dangerous." Salazar's hand moved toward his desk drawer slowly, carefully. "There's a gun in that drawer," John observed calmly. "Loaded. Safety off. You're wondering if you can reach it before I react." Salazar froze. "Here's what you don't understand, Rodrigo." John took one step closer. "I didn't come here for a conversation. I didn't come to negotiate or threaten or make deals. Another step. I came to tell you that the partnership is over. Not because of business, not because of profit splits or territory disputes. One more step." John was at the edge of the desk now, looking down at Salazar like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Because you tried to murder my pregnant wife." "John, listen." Salazar's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to. The fire was meant to scare you. Not, you should have aimed at me. The words hung in the air like a death knell. You should have put a bullet in my head. John continued, his voice still terrifyingly quiet. Should have ambushed me leaving a meeting. Should have targeted me directly like a man instead of a coward. He leaned forward, palms flat on the desk despite the pain it sent through his burned hands. But you didn't. You went after a pregnant woman who never hurt you, never threatened you, never even knew you existed. And in doing so, you made the single worst decision of your life. Salazar's hand darted for the drawer. He never reached it. John's movement was economical, precise despite his injuries. His hand caught Salazar's wrist, slamming it against the desk with enough force to crack bone. The older man cried out in pain. The office door burst open. 2 of Salazar's guards rushed in, guns drawn. They stopped when they saw Raphael standing in the hallway behind them, flanked by 4 of John's enforcers. All armed, all perfectly positioned. Your choice, Raphael said calmly to Salazar's guards. You can die protecting a man who set fire to a pregnant woman. Or you can walk away and find new employment. The guards looked at each other, at their boss pinned to the desk, at the overwhelming force in the hallway. They lowered their weapons and walked away. John released Salazar's wrist. The older man cradled his injured arm, fear naked on his face now. The Eastern Territories are mine now, John said, straightening. Your operations, your assets, your remaining loyal men, all mine. You have 24 hours to leave the city. You can't. I can. John's voice carried absolute certainty. Because every one of your lieutenants just watched your guards abandon you. Because your accountant is already transferring your liquid assets to my accounts. Because the story of what you did trying to burn a pregnant woman alive is spreading through every organization in this city. He turned toward the door, then paused. You wanted me to know how it feels to lose, Rodrigo. John looked back over his shoulder. Now you don't exist. He walked out of the office, past Raphael and the enforcers, down the stairs through a headquarters that was already emptying as word spread. Salazar's empire was collapsing in real time, lieutenants abandoning ship, guards disappearing into the night. By the time John reached his car, Rodrigo Salazar had lost everything: his partnership, his territory, his reputation, his future. John drove away without looking back, his phone already ringing with confirmations. The Eastern Territories secured, Salazar's accounts frozen, his remaining operations absorbed into John's empire. The 50-50 deal was over, 100% control restored. But as John drove through the city toward the hospital where Lillian waited, he felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just the cold clarity that came from crossing a line he'd always known existed but had never needed to cross until someone threatened his family. His phone buzzed with a final message from Raphael. Salazar's been escorted to the airport. One-way ticket. He won't be back. John deleted the message and kept driving. The war was over. Now came the harder part, figuring out what kind of man he wanted to be for the child who would soon enter his world. John returned to the hospital at midnight, his body screaming from the confrontation with Salazar, from the weeks of burned flesh healing too slowly, from ribs that still ached with every breath. The nurse at the desk recognized him now. No longer tried to stop him as he made his way to room 847. Lillian was awake, sitting propped against pillows, one hand resting on her belly. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes immediately searched his face for answers to questions she hadn't asked. It's done, John said quietly, closing the door behind him. She nodded slowly. The man who ordered the fire? Gone. He won't hurt anyone ever again. Lillian studied him for a long moment, reading things in his expression that he hadn't put into words. And his organization? Mine now. John crossed to the chair beside her bed, lowering himself carefully. Everything he controlled, everyone who worked for him, it's all consolidated under my operations. So you're more powerful than before. It wasn't a question, but John answered anyway. Yes. Silence filled the room, broken only by the steady beeping of monitors. Lillian's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, protective, maternal. What happens now? She asked finally. John looked at their reflection in the darkened window, a man in an expensive suit with bandaged hands, a woman in a hospital gown carrying their child, 2 people from completely different worlds who'd somehow built something fragile and real between the violence and the silence. I don't know, he admitted. For 19 years, I've known exactly what happens next. Every move calculated, every decision strategic, but sitting here, watching you almost die, carrying our child out of that fire. He trailed off, searching for words that had never been part of his vocabulary. I realized something, he continued quietly. All the power I've built, all the territory I control, all the men who fear me, none of it mattered when you were trapped on that balcony. None of it could protect you. None of it could save you. Lillian reached for his hand, her fingers gentle against the bandages. Power isn't what I thought it was, John said. It's not about domination or control or making people fear you. Real power is keeping safe what matters most. So what are you going to do? John looked at her, this woman who'd loved him despite everything, who was carrying his child, who'd survived fire and smoke because he'd climbed through hell to reach her. I'm going to scale down, he said. Cut the high-risk operations. Reduce exposure. Let trusted lieutenants handle day-to-day while I step back. Surprise flickered across Lillian's face. You're retiring? Not exactly. John squeezed her hand carefully. But I'm choosing differently. Choosing you. Choosing this. He gestured to her belly. Choosing a life where I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who's going to try to use my family against me. The men who work for you, will they accept that? The ones who matter will understand. John's voice carried quiet certainty. The ones who don't can find employment elsewhere. I'm not abandoning the organization, just restructuring my role. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. What changed? You almost died. John's voice cracked slightly. Our child almost died, and I realized that every territory I control, every alliance I maintain, every enemy I eliminate, none of it means anything if I lose you both in the process. He stood carefully and leaned over the bed, pressing his forehead against hers. I'm tired, Lillian. Tired of the constant vigilance. Tired of turning everything into strategy. Tired of being feared instead of loved, she whispered. John pulled back to look at her. Yes. She touched his face, tracing the lines that 19 years of violence and calculation had carved there. You're already loved. You've always been loved. You just had to almost lose everything to realize it mattered more than power. They stayed like that, foreheads touching, breathing in sync, two people who'd found each other in the darkness and refused to let go even when fire tried to tear them apart. There's something else, John said eventually. I want to move you. Not to another apartment in the city. Somewhere far from here. Secure, but peaceful. A place where our child can grow up without security protocols and encrypted locations. Where? I'm thinking the coast. Northern California, maybe. Small town, quiet, beautiful. I can handle business remotely for the most part. Visit the city when necessary. But home would be with you. Lillian smiled through her tears. You've really thought about this. I've had a lot of time to think. Sitting in this chair, watching you sleep, listening to our baby's heartbeat on those monitors. John sat back down, exhaustion finally catching up with him. I don't want to be the kind of father who's always absent. Always working. Always choosing power over presence. Your father was like that? John's jaw tightened. My father taught me that strength meant never showing weakness. That family was leveraged to be protected but never prioritized. That love made you vulnerable. And now? Now I know he was wrong. John looked at Lillian with complete clarity. Love does make you vulnerable, but it also makes you human. And I'd rather be vulnerable and human than powerful and alone. The baby kicked strong enough that John could see the movement beneath the hospital blanket. Lillian laughed softly, guiding his bandaged hand to the spot. Your child disagrees with something, she said. John felt the movement against his palm life asserting itself, demanding to be acknowledged, refusing to be ignored. Or agrees very enthusiastically, he replied, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. They sat like that until dawn began filtering through the hospital windows, planning a future that looked nothing like the past John had built. Talking about houses with ocean views and normal schools, and a life where their child could be a child instead of leverage. And for the first time in 19 years, John Navarez felt something he'd never associated with his life before: hope. The house stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by pine trees and the constant sound of waves breaking against rocks below. Modern but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in light without sacrificing privacy. 3 bedrooms, an office, a nursery painted in soft sage green, the color Lillian had chosen while standing in a burning building, holding paint swatches and dreaming of safety. John carried boxes from the moving truck, his hands finally healed enough to bear weight without bandages. Though scars traced patterns across his palms and fingers like topographical maps of the night, everything changed. Inside, Lillian directed placement with the authority of someone who'd survived fire and earned the right to decide where furniture belonged. She was 9 months pregnant now, moving carefully but confidently, building a home in this sanctuary 300 miles from the city where John's empire continued operating without his constant presence. "The crib goes against the north wall," she instructed the movers. "Away from the window. And the changing table needs to be accessible from both sides." John watched her command the space, this woman who'd married a ghost and now lived with a man trying to become real. She caught him staring and smiled. "What? Nothing. Just, you're beautiful when you're delegating," she laughed. "After 19 years of letting you make all the decisions, I've discovered I quite enjoy being in charge." "Noted." John set down his box and crossed to her, his hands finding her waist carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm carrying a small human who's running out of room." Lillian leaned against him. "The doctor said any day now. Any day their child would enter the world. Any day John would become a father, would hold in his hands the life he'd carried through fire and smoke and the rubble of his old existence." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Lillian felt the vibration between them. "You can check it. It can wait." "John, it can wait." He pulled the phone out and powered it off completely, then set it on the kitchen counter. "Today is about this. About us. About getting ready." The movers finished and left. The house settled into afternoon quiet, broken only by ocean sounds and the occasional creak of new construction finding its equilibrium. John and Lillian moved through rooms, unpacking boxes, making decisions about where things belonged in this new life. Every item placed felt like a small declaration of permanence: books on shelves, photos in frames, kitchen supplies in cabinets, building something meant to last. "Tell me about the business," Lillian said while they worked. "How's the transition going?" John had been honest with her about everything since the hospital. No more secrets, no more careful silence. She knew what he did, who he was, what his empire looked like from the inside. And she'd chosen to stay anyway. "Raphael's handling operations," John said, folding clothes into drawers. "He checks in twice a week. Major decisions still come through me, but day-to-day is his responsibility now. And he's good at it? Better than I expected. Turns out stepping back lets other people step up." John paused, considering. "The organization is actually running smoother without me micromanaging everything. Does that bother you?" "It should." John smiled slightly. 19 years of believing I was irreplaceable, and it turns out I'm not. But no, it doesn't bother me. It's freeing." They worked until sunset painted the ocean in shades of orange and gold. Lillian stood at the window, silhouetted against the dying light, one hand on her belly. John joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers. "Do you miss it?" she asked quietly. "The city, the power, the constant motion." "Sometimes," John admitted. "Not the danger or the violence, but the certainty of knowing exactly who I was and what I was supposed to do. Out here, I'm figuring out a different version of myself." "And how's that going? Ask me in a year." He kissed her temple. "Right now, I'm just trying to be present. To be here completely instead of always calculating the next move. You're doing better than you think." They stood watching darkness claim the ocean, the lighthouse down the coast beginning its rotation, casting light across water that stretched endlessly toward horizons John would never control. That night, they christened the house by cooking dinner together. Something simple, normal, domestic. They ate on the deck despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, talking about names they still hadn't agreed on and what kind of parents they wanted to be. John's phone stayed off. The empire operated without him. The world continued turning. And for the first time in his adult life, John Navarez wasn't trying to control any of it. Later, lying in bed with Lillian curled against him, John stared at the ceiling and thought about the journey from that burning building to this quiet room. About the man who'd climbed through fire carrying his wife, and the man who now lay in darkness listening to her breathe. "John?" Lillian's voice was drowsy. "Are you awake?" "Yeah. No regrets?" He thought about power and territory and 19 years of building an empire. Thought about Salazar's face when he realized he'd lost everything. Thought about Gabriel Torres relocating with his daughter to a new life funded by John's promise. Thought about the scars on his hands and the life growing in Lillian's belly. "No regrets," John said quietly. "Everything that happened, the partnership, the fire, almost losing you, it was all necessary to get here, to understand what actually matters, which is this." He pulled her closer. "You, our child, this house on a cliff where nobody's trying to kill us, and the biggest decision is paint colors." Lillian laughed softly. We still haven't finished the nursery. Tomorrow. You said that yesterday. Tomorrow, I mean it. They drifted toward sleep, safe in a house 300 miles from the city where John Navarez was still feared but no longer present. Where Raphael managed operations with efficiency, John grudgingly admitted exceeded his own. Where former enemies had become careful allies and the Eastern Territories ran smoothly under new management. The empire existed. It functioned. It generated wealth and power. But John no longer measured himself by its size. He measured himself by the woman sleeping against him and the child about to enter their world. By mornings without violence and evenings without calculation. By the slow, difficult work of becoming someone who protected rather than dominated. Real power, he'd learned, wasn't who feared you. It was who survived because of you. It was who thrived because you chose presence over dominance. It was building something that lasted beyond territory and alliances and strategic partnerships that inevitably crumbled. Standing in that burning corridor with Lillian in his arms, John had made a vow in smoke and flames and absolute clarity. Whoever did this will pay. He'd kept that vow. Salazar had paid. The partnership had ended. The empire had been consolidated. But the real vow, the one that mattered, had been made in a hospital room while watching his wife sleep. The vow to come back. To choose differently. To be the kind of man who could walk away from power because something more important was waiting. That vow, John was keeping every day. In this house on a cliff, with the woman he'd carried through fire, waiting for the child who would inherit not an empire, but a father who'd learned what truly mattered before it was too late. Outside, waves crashed against rocks. The lighthouse rotated. Stars appeared in a sky unpolluted by city lights. And John Navarez, who'd ruled an empire for 19 years, finally understood what it meant to be free. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.